Hi guys, and welcome to another edition of The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Dr. Jack Hunter. Now Jack has been exploring the borderlands of consciousness, religion and ecology and the paranormal. Now he lives in the hills of Mid Wales with his family, and his doctoral research with the University of Bristol examined the experiences of spirit mediums and their influence on the development of self-concepts and models of consciousness. And this is an effort towards a non-reductive anthropology of the paranormal. Dr. Jack Hunter, welcome to the show.
It's great, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. Listening to a few past interviews that you've done, just very briefly, there's something very different about the way that you're going about researching the subjects that are kind of near and dear to my heart. So I really appreciate what you're doing and the contribution that you've made as well. Thank you.
That's great, thanks.
So just to give a background on yourself, if you were to just briefly say what it is that you do.
Well, I'm an anthropologist by training. So I've been involved in anthropology really since I did my undergraduate course for my bachelor's degree. And when I was doing that, I became interested in thinking about spirits and the paranormal and different ways that anthropology might engage with those kinds of issues. So I've developed my ideas and my thinking, and I've done more kind of field work with spirit mediums over the last 7 or 8 years, and ultimately it ended up with my finished PhD, which I got in February. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. I've been researching mediumship through the lens of social anthropology, mainly using a kind of experiential, participatory kind of ethnographic approach. And ethnography is like the main research tool in anthropology. It's the process of going out into the world and interacting with people. You could be, for example, going out and living with people out in like some tribal societies, or you could do anthropology. You could do ethnography, living with people in suburban Bristol, which is what I did. Wonderful. So that was my main way of into researching the paranormal.
Well, congratulations on your PhD as well, and anthropology. Just break that down for us, for the audience as well, and what that means.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, anthropology is basically the study of human beings. So the word comes from anthropos, which is a Greek word meaning human or man. And then obviously we've got the ology, which is the study of. So it's the study of human beings. And it's usually split into 4 categories. So you have biological anthropology, which is like the study of human evolution, how we evolved from primates and all those kinds of things. There's archaeology, which is the study of past human societies based on their physical remains, so digging things up from the ground. Then there's linguistic anthropology, which is the study of languages and how human beings use languages and create meaning and all of those kinds of things. And then there's social and cultural anthropology, which is my main kind of area. And that is all to do with human societies, human cultures and beliefs, and how we live our lives from an embodied perspective, I suppose. So yeah, that's anthropology.
Thank you. So for your PhD, would you call it a dissertation for a PhD as well?
Yeah, thesis.
Thesis, yeah. For your thesis, what was that about?
Yeah, so the thesis was based on my research with spirit mediums in Bristol, a small mediumship development circle called the Bristol Spirit Lodge. It's a non-denominational circle, which basically means that it's a private group and they're not associated with the Spiritualist National Union or anything like that. They're kind of their own independent group. And they were founded in about 2006 by a lady called Christine Dinucci. And basically she had been introduced to mediumship, specifically introduced to physical mediumship. And she'd had some kind of like mind-blowing experiences during a seance, and she decided that she wanted to do her own research into the phenomena of physical mediumship. So she set up this lodge in Bristol, And basically they started to develop mediums, first of all, from scratch. So she would talk to her friends and see if any of her friends wanted to get involved in mediumship and if they wanted to develop. And, you know, some of her friends later went on to develop mediumistic abilities. And then later on, people started to come into the lodge as well, you know, just through reading about it on their blog and websites and things. So it kind of is something that grew basically from Christine's interest in mediumship. And it's kind of like a scientific or semi-scientific, semi-experimental inquiry into the nature of mediumship. And it just so happened that they were just about 10, 15 minutes down the road from where I was living as a student. So when I came to want to write my undergraduate dissertation, they were the perfect kind of, the perfect location for me to do some field work on belief in spirits.
And what was the age group of the people that you did the thesis on as well?
Yeah, I mean, they were, I suppose, aged between, at the time that I was doing my field work, kind of like the mid-30s up to, I think the oldest member of the lodge at that time was about 80.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of age range we're talking about. But there were people who'd been involved with spiritualism and different, other kinds of religious movements, Methodists and Quakers and things, who've been interested in spiritualism as like a lifelong spiritual learning kind of experience. And then there were people who were kind of new to it as well, who'd maybe had a few strange experiences and they wanted to find out more about those experiences. So they get in touch with places like the Bristol Spirit Lodge, and then ultimately they learn about their experiences and then maybe how to, I often say they kind of learn how to domesticate those experiences in seances.
Sure. Now we'll get into what some of the experiences that you had at the lodge were that went into the thesis as well. I think that's important because that's probably, pushed you into all sorts of directions and thinking. And what is your thrust for this subject then? Why did you choose this particular subject for your thesis?
That's a good question. I think really it stems down to a few different kinds of experiences that I've had in my life growing up. I was always interested when I was younger in things like religion and things like the paranormal. Even though I'm not from a religious family, I don't have a religious background in any way, but those kinds of things always struck me as interesting. Why is it that people think certain things are sacred and holy, and what is this thing about religious experiences and paranormal experiences, and do they kind of hint at other kinds of realities, different kinds of worlds? So I was always interested in that.
Sure.
And then as I was growing up, I had certain experiences that built on that interest and encouraged me down different paths. So, for example, when I was in my kind of teens, I was interested in rock music and playing in my band, and also psychedelics and things like that. And I had some interesting psychedelic experiences which suggested that there might be more going on than our usual explanatory frameworks allow for. So seeing entities on magic mushrooms and things like that. Yep, you can say something?
No, please go ahead, please.
Yeah. So that's just one amongst other kinds of experiences. So by the time I got to university, I was particularly interested in finding ways to explore these kinds of things, which are like quite controversial, fringe topics, but in an academic, kind of rigorous and critical way. So I was thinking about entities and spirits, and why is it that people come to believe in spirits? And I mean, now looking back on it, it was quite a naive question to ask. But why is it that people believe in spirits? So I started off going to spiritualist churches. I didn't have much success in getting good interviews with people there for some reason. And then I did a little bit of research, and I found this place, the Bristol Spirit Lodge, and it seemed like the perfect setting to research why it is that people believe in spirits. And then obviously once I got in there and started experiencing things, I started to reframe my questions, and it became less about why it is that people believe in spirits and more about the experience of spirits and how spirits actually make themselves known in seances. So yeah, my interest has been long throughout my life, and it's kind of focused in over the years.
And I guess as well also how that kind of contact is helping people to become a better person, how it's helping them to, change their lives or improve a quality of their life from the information that comes across.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting subject. If we're thinking about mediumship in terms of mental well-being and physical well-being and all of those kinds of things, these are new areas of interest in mediumship research. Over the past 100 odd years, 130 odd years, the dominant approach to mediumship has been a kind of like a debunking attitude, that we want to go and prove that the mediums are wrong and demonstrate that the effects that they're producing in seance are the product of trickery and stuff. And we've ignored over all of this time all of these other positive we could think of them as side effects, I suppose, positive benefits of mediumship practice, things to do with mental well-being and living flourishing lives. Mediumship certainly seems to help a lot of people in that regard. Whether we're talking about dealing with bereavement and grief and all of those kinds of things, or whether we're talking about, like I was saying earlier, the domestication of anomalous experiences. So the making sense of and learning to control experiences that were scary or threatening or frightening. Absolutely. So it's whole new areas of mediumship research that are just waiting to be explored. And it's good that that the academic climate is kind of opening up a little bit to these kinds of things.
How do you keep grounded in the research when you're doing it? I mean, how because obviously you've got an interest in this subject, and let me ask you this before we get into that. Maybe what is your truth on this subject?
Yeah, it's funny. It's an interesting question, that, because my work or my research and my writing and things, that is kind of my truth. That's where I'm expressing it. And ultimately the kind of argument that's coming out of all of this stuff is that we live in a world, maybe even many worlds, that are really complex. There's lots of different processes going on. There's lots of different influences. We've got humans, animals, plants, all of these different things coexisting at the same time. So my overall kind of model of it is one of complexity. And and another thing that I want to add to that is that I don't think of myself as necessarily as a believer in anything. I just kind of experience the world and then take it from there. So yeah, that's my kind of grounding in it. And I try to stay as not objective, but critical. I like to get involved, and I embrace the subjectivity of anthropology, and I think it's really useful, and it's the only way of engaging with these kinds of issues. But at the same time, I see that it's important to stay open-minded, but it's also important to stay critical.
Yes, but then an atheist would obviously come from the perspective of not being able to be open-minded and just being very critical, and there'd be none of that balance. It would just be this cannot be true, and yeah. Full stop. That's that's their truth on it, with choosing some of the worst cases sometimes as examples.
Yeah, no, it's true. People do become they become blinded to things. And I think the key point for me is the role of participation and experience. So it's very easy to be a kind of like a skeptic who denounces all of these things, but who's never actually participated in a seance, or a skeptic who's never gone on a ghost hunt or whatever and had the experience and the feelings that are involved in those kinds of practices. So for me, to round off that angle, so that you're not wholly skeptical, you're not critical all the time, you have to be open-minded and be willing to participate and willing to let down your kind of, I call them ontological flood barriers, but willing to let down these barriers and open yourself up to multiple possibilities simultaneously. And that's the only way that we can kind of move beyond this skeptic versus believers impasse that seems to have settled over the debate, is through opening up a new kind of dialogue.
Well,
So that's what I'm being trying
but
to
then
do.
it is always the case, unless it's provable repeatedly, then it's out the window with it.
Well, in terms of like a mainstream like positivist view of science, but in terms of repeatability, you can't get much more repeatable than paranormal experiences. You look across all of the world's different cultures. You have some kind of belief in supernatural realms or supernatural beings. There are similar kinds of experiences reported across cultures. There's some really interesting research that shows that there are similar kinds of of experiences reported not just across cultures, but through time as well, in cultures that never had any contact with each other. So in terms of repeatability, there seems to be something there. It's not necessarily always replicable in laboratory conditions, but it certainly seems to happen in real life. Absolutely. And I think that's where anthropology comes into it, is because that's what we're dealing with in anthropology. It's the real life situation.
Absolutely.
Not in the lab.
Just remind people as well of your website.
Yeah, I've got a few websites. I have one called www.paranthropology.co.uk, which is where I host the journal Paranthropology, Journal of Anthropological Approaches to the Paranormal, which I established in 2010. And it's ongoing. It's a little bit more sporadic now than it used to be. It used to be much more regular, but life gets in the way of these things. But it's a place for sharing scholarly articles about the paranormal, social scientific approaches to the study of the paranormal, anomalous, religious experience. And then there's my personal website as well, which is at jack-hunter.webstarts.com. And you can find links to all sorts of my podcast appearances and radio interviews, a list of all my publications. Some of them you can access online, and all my as well.
Wonderful.
So that's the best place to go if you want to find out.
Excellent. And now we're linking those websites. They're coming on throughout the screen, and periodically your books are coming on the screen as well, just to let you know. So going back to the discussion with you about the atheists, I find atheists to be the most loving, spiritual people that you can meet sometimes. They care about others, they care about themselves, they're just really nice people. So it's a real contradiction for me sometimes for people to be living from such a loving space, yet they are so shut off to any potential of where their consciousness is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I like to think about it in terms of spirituality, and I have a kind of definition of spirituality that I like to use, which goes to show that even atheists can be spiritual in some sense. And my understanding of spirituality is from William James's definition of the spiritual, which is to do with however we conceive of ourselves in relation to the divine, in whatever way we conceive it. So thinking about our relationship with the divine could be a complete rejection of the divine. It's still a kind of a spiritual choice that we're making. So yeah, I don't think there's any, there's nothing to say that atheists are necessarily bad people, and there's nothing to suggest that, not believing in the paranormal or not believing in religion or the supernatural makes you a bad person. I don't really see the connection.
No, and the thing is, the one key thing that we all have to face up to, whether we go through a life where we never look at these questions of, where is my consciousness coming from? Is it creation of the brain? Is it beyond the brain? And how am I able to be aware of the I am aspect of me, separate to those around me, and to know that I'm, conscious, to know that oneself. And if we're never to look into these subjects, I think it comes looking for us in the end, in the face of death. We all have to face death, whether it's the death of friends, our eventual death ourselves. And when we say, well, we just carry on to nothing. Well, that could be true, right? But I suppose my personal quest for it, and I'll get your answer on this, is it's always been more fun to me to look into the potential of, well, what could I bring from the space of, if we do continue, what could I bring from that space to make my present moment better for myself and better for others?
Yeah. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It reminds me of an approach that I used to talk about a bit in this context of the anthropology of the paranormal, then an as-if approach. So we can behave as if, if when we're doing our ethnography in the field, we don't necessarily have to believe that spirits exist, but if we behave as if spirits exist, and go along with the local customs and traditions, and pay your respects to the spirits as if they actually exist, then you will learn more about that way of life. I think we can also tie this in with some of my interest in ecological concerns as well. That if we were to interact with the world as if it's populated by nature spirits, or as if the trees have spirits, or as if the river is a person, then our behaviors will change in that way. So again, we're not saying that we necessarily have to believe these kinds of things, but if we start to behave as if they have an impact, or as if they make a difference, then our behavior changes as well.
Absolutely. Well, and then it comes to the debate of religion versus spiritualism as well. I mean, there's so much we're going to try to talk about, but religion versus spiritualism, and it doesn't have to verse, it's just, what it is for me with religion is, I find that the understanding of what you've just said there is a conclusion that we come to ourselves without being it forced upon us, and we can pick and cherry pick the good parts that are for us. Where religion, it's the one book, the all or nothing, and anything out of that context of that one book cannot be true, and is the work of something evil.
Yeah, I mean, there are different factions within religions as well. I mean, obviously you have fundamentalist, literalist people who take the Bible and other holy books as the given word of God, and that's exactly how it is. But then I think also within the mainstream religions, there is the other end that is more open to exploring as well. But yeah, there's definitely something interesting going on there. I don't see I don't see a disconnect between religion and spirituality. I think they are both the same thing. It's just that they take it in different directions. Religion likes to crystallize things and make them solid and rigid so that they last for 1,000, 2,000 years or more, and spirituality is constantly changing. But really, I think their kind of ultimate impulse, or the thing that gives them both their vitality, is probably actually the same thing.
But the problem I find with religion is that as we've become more logical, and we've become a society where it's okay to think logically, and it's okay to apply that to something that we may have faith in. I can't see the application of logic sometimes in a doctrine that's so old, and just goes against any as we know better, we grow better kind of attitude.
Yeah, no, it does get stuck in the past. I agree, but yeah, I think even though on the majority it's stuck in the past, there are still these bits on the edges where new innovations take place, and where the dialogue between orthodox religion and the more fluid spirituality take place. I know, for example, from my own experience on this permaculture project that I've been working on, we've been doing permaculture courses at Chester Cathedral, which is obviously an Anglican cathedral. And again, we can think about the Anglican Church as being one of these, fixed religions of the book. But then on the edge of it, we have this new dialogue taking place, and around the environment, around ecology. But it's bringing in other people who would never necessarily go into the cathedral, pagans and animists and other people who are interested in different approaches to ecology and different ways of regenerating our environment. So there's always this interesting discussion going on the edges of these big organizations, which I think is something that I'm interested in exploring further, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got so many great avenues you're going to go down as well, that you can go down with the work that you're doing right now. Well, with the spirituality, and with any religion as well, there's with any trade, shall we say, no matter what you're into, there's bad electrician, bad plumbers, corrupt police
Yeah.
officers, and in the field of spirituality, there is corruption as well. There's people that that pretend to have information that it's not true. That there is a lot of untruths in this field. Maybe this field suffers for it more than any. I don't know, but I think it's more of a sensitive field for it to suffer from when it does happen.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of obviously there are unscrupulous people out there who want to make money from people who are, suffering from bereavement and all those kinds of things. But again, in my interactions with mediums that I've encountered in the real world, this kind of stereotype, although obviously it does exist and it does refer to certain people, in my experience, I very, very rarely come across anything like that. The mediums that I worked with in Bristol, for example, there was no money ever exchanged for seances. They did it purely for their own kind of interest and their own desire to develop their trance mediumship. And Christine would, generally kind of tell people to avoid coming in if they wanted to make contact with a deceased loved one, because that's not what their seances were about. Mediums usually had a set group of spirits that would communicate through them, and those were the only spirits who would come through. It's not like you were getting messages coming through from the deceased, specifically for a particular individual, although it did happen, occasionally. So yeah, there are unscrupulous people, but you have to use your judgment really and talk to people and get to know them a bit better before you get involved in these things.
And
there's another angle on this as well.
Sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Another angle on this as well that I talked about in my book, Engaging the Anomalous, is the role of trickery and fraud and all of those kinds of performative aspects in actually making mediumship effective, especially in physical mediumship. So this is kind of turning things on its head a little bit. So we say that the presence of fraud in the performance of one particular medium automatically means that medium is a fake and can't be trusted anymore. But there are lots of interesting examples from the history of psychical research where they've caught mediums red-handed doing things that they shouldn't be doing, trying to trick people or moving objects with their hands, and then claiming that it was spirits, and at the same time genuine, seemingly unexplainable paranormal phenomena occurring around that medium as they're doing the trick. There was a really interesting study by a parapsychologist called Kenneth Batcheldor, who found that if he introduced fake phenomena early on in his experiments, which were experiments in table tipping and those kind of physical seance phenomena, if he introduced a fake phenomenon early on, then he was more likely to get genuine phenomena later. So trickery, performance, fraud, all of these things kind of mesh together. They interact with our belief, and that our belief somehow also seems to have an effect in the real world. So it's a very tricky, murky territory. Just because one medium gets caught doing a trick doesn't necessarily mean that all of their paranormal repertoire is fake. So we've got to exercise caution.
Absolutely. And isn't that interesting that if someone does go to do something that's a bit trickery to begin with, that in the end something comes from that that is information that they couldn't have come up with any other way, right? Which is or even the tip in the table. I wonder if that allowance of faking it to begin with is almost like the allowance of allowing something bigger to come through, and there's less roadblocks for it to be blocked. I mean, I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just saying, well, what if? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Kenneth Batcheldor thought. He thought that if you witness the trick, then it puts you into a frame of mind where you're more likely to believe that it's possible that these things can happen, in the first place. And we know from other parapsychological that, if you're a believer, if you're kind of open to these things, then psi phenomena manifest more readily.
Well,
so perhaps
that's amazing. That gives me a big aha. That's almost like saying, right, that if you're not ready for it, it won't. If the student's not ready, the master will not appear. And that's almost like saying we create our reality to such a point that we even create the reality to choose to see whether that there's more to this reality than not. And if we choose to block it off, it will never show itself or force itself upon us.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. It seems to be the case, but it's also a danger. We don't want to go down. We don't want to go all the way down the path and say that, all reality. Well, maybe some people do want to say that all reality is created by us. Like an idealistic
That's
perspective.
the problem. That's the problem, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because then, when the most craziest information comes to you, and it's like, now this is utter craziness, and this, whatever it may be, right? Whatever it could be, right? Where does logic fit into that? Because that's a fine balance, isn't it? I'm saying there, well, what if we create our reality to even such a point that we either switch on to more perception than we are right now, like a radio, we can tune in finer, or where's that balance? Yeah,
it's a tricky balance, but I think what we have to do is also bear in mind the possibility that there is more out there than just us, if you see what I mean. Like, we create reality, but we are also interacting with something else. If we take a seance, for example, again, the phenomena that we observe in the seance, they are the result of our interaction of our consciousness with not just the consciousness of the people in the room, but also possibly the consciousness of the spirit that's communicating. So the whole experience is kind of like a collective manifestation that contains elements of subjectivity and external objectivity, if that makes sense. So we don't want to go all the way down to say that it's all created by the mind, but we also don't want to go down the route of saying that the mind isn't involved at all. There is something external out there, but it makes itself known to us through our beliefs and expectations.
Okay then, but what if that which is out there is coming through some other people, right? Or many people, it comes through this information in different ways. It's coming through as so ridiculous, so crazy, so kind of ungrounded, that really, with that information coming through, what help was it to anyone except for fear porn, or just, something so science fiction, and so people are looking at it more like, oh, this is a good story right now, a good bit of science fiction right now.
Yeah, again, you have to use your judgment. You've got to take the information that's relevant and meaningful, and this is where it pays to be critical and to take a kind of anthropological look at things. It does, because you don't want to be blindly accepting nonsense, but equally you want to be open-minded enough to entertain the possibility that there is some kernel of truth going on there, or that there is some kind of there's an element of reality. But then when it becomes too ungrounded, and it's so preposterous what's being suggested, why would something loving or something that's true come through like that when it's so stupid, in a sense, what's being said? Right. And I'm kind of referring to my UFO community here right now as well, because I think I could apply your work to this. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but this is another thing that we need to bear in mind. If we're accepting the possibility that there are other things out there, then we also have to accept the possibility that it's not all, it's not all love and light and all of those kinds of things, that there are grey areas, and then there are like malevolent things going on as well. And this is an issue that's come up all throughout the history of dealing with spirits and, of theurgy and magic and all those kinds of things. Is that, you should never really trust these entities. You can never be 100% sure that the information they're giving you is accurate, or that that they're not trying to lead you down different avenues, that they're not trying to trick you and con you into doing some sort of crazy quest or things like that, which does happen.
It does happen.
So yeah.
But I prefer the information when I go see a channeler, or if I'm going to go see a medium. If it's empowering, it's going to help me in my moment. It's expanding my mind to something sensible and something, even though it may be bigger than I thought before, but it's something still kind of grounded and helpful. And I've come away from there feeling more empowered and seeing myself in a much bigger stance than small me all the time. Or it's, and it's helping me feel good about myself. And I'm going out there with, pumping my chest in a sense, right? I'm not saying it's always like that, right? But I'm saying if it's something positive, then I'm not against that. I'm for that.
Yeah, and it comes back to, I was talking about William James earlier, but William James said that in order to demonstrate whether a religious experience was genuinely a religious experience or not, that we need to look at the fruits of the experience, so the results of the experience. And if you come away from the experience, feeling a renewed sense of connection with the world, a renewed sense of connection with other human beings around you, positive things, then according to William James, then it was a genuine religious experience. If you come away with it and you haven't been affected in any way, then it was nothing. It had no impact on your life. So yeah, I think you're right. If you come away from it feeling positive, that your worldview has been enhanced in some way, then it's all good. But yeah, it's not always like that.
Yes, no, not at all. And going back to mediums, I mean, I think mediums are very different to channelers. I think for me, a channeler is someone that's giving spiritual teaching information. And the funny thing is, it's not really communicating with Auntie Ethel or your deceased relatives or family, where the mediums or the psychics are more about connections with the deceased ones, in a sense.
Yeah, it's true. My fieldwork experience with trance mediums in Bristol kind of blurs the line between spiritualist mediumship and more kind of like, I don't want to say new age channeling, but I've said it now, so like new age channeling. Because the mediums that I was working with, they, like I was saying earlier, they had their own set spirit teams, they had regular communicators, and they weren't bringing in, the deceased spirits of your relatives to communicate with. So in that sense, although they considered themselves to be mediums, that they were dealing with spirits of the deceased, their role is more like that of a channeler. So you would talk to the spirits, and they would tell you about their experiences in the spirit world and give you insights into their kind of philosophy and all of those kinds of things. In fact, after I did my undergraduate dissertation, I put together a little book of interviews with a particularly interesting spirit called Charlie at the Bristol Spirit Lodge. And in that book, he kind of explores his philosophy. So in a lot of ways, that's a lot more like channeling than the kind of mediumship that you would get in a spiritualist church.
But then isn't that really what channeling's going to? I think it's it's not a new religion, it's more of a new philosophy. A replacement to religion in the philosophy sense, in some respects. I mean, I only say that, right, because I've interviewed 80-something channelers making my documentary called They Call Us Channelers, which I'm still editing. So,
wow, amazing.
Yeah, I went around the world meeting all these people. And that was, that was interesting. That was. So when you say someone like Charlie, I'm like, I know what that experience is like. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And another thing is you think to yourself, well, what level is Charlie at? Where is he at in the sense of where we go to? Is he? I mean, does he know more than he did on this side, or is he just a bit more expanded? Does he really? Is it just Charlie's truth that where Charlie's at? And you speak to someone else, the Tsars or Theo or whatever, and they've got a more expanded view than Charlie because they've gone to like a vaster distance from where Charlie is in their progression.
Yes. That would seem, that's the kind of, if you want to think in terms of like the cosmology that's implied by channeling and mediumship and all those kinds of things, then yeah, there does seem to be like a hierarchy of spirits, and you have those those higher, more ascended kind of spirits, and then you go right down to the like earthbound, lower level kind of entities, and then even down to like malicious, like demony kind of things that attach onto you. So yeah, if we take this philosophy all together, all of the information we get through channelers and mediums about the nature of the spirit world, then that certainly seems to be the case. And it also seems to be the case, like I was saying earlier, that we have to be able to exercise our own discernment, because there's a high chance that some of these high ascended spirits that talk to us through channelers or mediums might actually be imposters or pretending to be that way.
There is always that, and maybe they're up to a level that they're up to, and they don't want us to go above where they're at because they they've got their own issues, right? It could be. I think again, if information is coming through that's not empowering, that's dispowering, that's negative towards other people or whatever it may be, that's something that's not helpful, or is not you're working on wants you to work on its behalf to do whatever it may be, right? I think you know what's good and you know what's bad. You know what feels right and feels right. And if it's empowering, I think, there's many ways to empower ourselves. We can go to a self-help guru, couldn't we? Or a motivational speaker, or there's many ways to do it. I think, channeling or mediums is just another form of that to help you. I mean, but some people watching this will say, yeah, but it's all fake. So how you're helping through fakeness? And, well,
there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence for the for the abilities of certain mediums. Whether we're talking about bringing accurate information from the dead, for example. Have you come across the Windbridge Research Institute?
No, where's that?
It's based in, I'm not sure where. I think they're in Arizona. I'm not sure.
Okay, yes.
But it's based around the work of Dr. Julie Beischel, who was, I think she was some kind of like a microbiologist to begin with, and now she's become involved in mediumship research, and she develops these really strong, like quintuple blinded protocols for testing mediums, and they have to go through this whole process of training and being tested and all of this kind of stuff before they get certified for experimental purposes. And some of the evidence that they've collected, I think personally, is particularly interesting, because they're ruling out all other possible methods of information transfer, and still information seems to be coming through. So if that kind of thing doesn't count as evidence of anything, then we're in trouble. But for me personally, it seems to suggest that more research in that direction is needed, and that there are that there is data out there that supports the idea that mediums can do something, not necessarily saying that it's necessarily communicating with spirits or any of that kind of thing, but it, equally as possibly could be, but that when they do these things, they are actually doing something. We know from brain imaging studies that when channelers and different people who are possessed go into their trance states, that they are entering into specific neurophysiological states that seem to be different from pathological states or imagining states. There's something's real going on there. There is some meat to dig into.
No, let me say something on that. There is. I went to the Irons Institute in San Francisco, right? This beautiful research center. I was there just 3 weeks or more ago. I really miss America right now, but I was there, right? And it's in this like amazing location. I thought I was going to the Skywalker Ranch for a minute. Do you know what I mean? It's so tucked off the beaten track. Just coming off the freeway, getting into the Irons. And yes, they're doing the same there with deep trance channel research, with medium research. That you're getting to see where their brain there's different types of brain research going on, and they are entering into these different compared to people who they test against that trying to do it as well, that are just off the street kind of thing. There's a different state they're in completely.
Yeah, it's really encouraging, I think, and it's just these small steps in the hard sciences that are taking place slowly and slowly, building up to, I don't know, hopefully, some kind of a new approach to these things.
Well, what about the healer? What about the healer that's on the American TV? I don't know if it's on UK TV. This guy that is not charging for it. He's got a different business on the side, completely separate, and he's able to go to people, and he's actually physically healing these people on camera.
I haven't come across that, but there are people. Again, if we look at the ethnographic literature, then these kinds of healing techniques have been practiced by humans for thousands and thousands of years, and medical science and all of this kind of stuff is only a relatively recent development. So we managed to survive however many thousands of years modern humans have been around, making use of shamanic medicines and shamanic healing techniques and all those kinds of things. There's plenty again of evidence to suggest that at least some kernel of truth exists within all of that stuff.
And with your research as well, how did your peers take the work that you were doing?
My peers I haven't had any negative run-ins, basically. I was very fortunate to find my supervisor, Fiona Bowie, who at the time was at the University of Bristol, and she had already spent a long time exploring the issues of religious experience. And just as I started to get in touch with her about the possibility of doing a PhD, she was moving into researching mediumship and spirit release therapy and all those kinds of things. So everything just kind of nicely fell into place for me. So I didn't have any negativity on that side of things, really. Most of my funding, though, for my PhD, I had to raise for myself, because obviously
Wow.
I wasn't on any kind of a program in the university. It's kind of like a loner PhD student, really. And then my other funding came from parapsychology. So I haven't actually had much in the way of funding from within anthropology, which may be a suggestion, maybe hinting at something that perhaps anthropology is not in the right frame of mind for this stuff yet. There is getting there, and parapsychology obviously is already a step further, willing to support this kind of research. But I think things are changing, especially with the kind of ontological turn in anthropology, of exploring the possibility that different cultures are not just it's not just a system of beliefs and symbols, that actually it might be relating to something actually real. And then also the non-human turn in anthropology, the turn towards focusing on non-humans, whether that's animals and plants and spirits and things. It's opening up new space within anthropology for this kind of discourse to take place. So I'm hopeful that anthropology is going to open up even further. I think my research is contributing to that in some way.
I think so. And where do you think you'll take your research into this field? I mean, you've done so much already, but I'm guessing there's just door after door opening right now in ideas of where you could take it as well in the future.
Yeah, there's lots of ideas bubbling over at the moment. One project I'm working on is linking the kind of eco-crisis concerns, climate change, and all of those kinds of issues with my the kind of paranormal animist kind of way of thinking about things. I have a book project which at the moment we're calling Greening the Paranormal, or maybe Rewilding the Paranormal, a book project that's gathering together different scholars who are interested in the intersection of anomalistics and ecology. So that's really consuming my thoughts at the moment, thinking about how interacting with the natural world leads to extraordinary experiences, and also how extraordinary experiences lead people to a reconnection with the natural world. So we seem to be dealing with like a feedback loop effect, which is really interesting. So this is where my research seems to be heading at the moment, and I'm looking to further explore that.
That's so fascinating. And just very briefly, because I know we're almost out of time here, but just going back to when you were doing the experiments, what was some of the kind of best scenario evidence that you had that came to you to really help you to justify some of your findings?
Yeah, there was a couple of incidents that were really important. The first one was in the very first seance that I went to, where I saw what I later learned was called transfiguration, where the medium's face seems to change and another face appears over. And I saw this kind of like a green mask appearing over the medium's face, and it slowly kind of slid down their chest and disappeared. And I kept the experience to myself. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've just seen like a green Chinese monk's head appear over the medium's face and then disappear. I'm not going to mention that to anybody else. And then we went back out into the house to have biscuits and tea and stuff. And two people also said that they'd seen the same thing, and I hadn't mentioned it. So there seemed to be some kind of an intersubjective experience going on there. And I call it intersubjective because I think it was a subjective experience. I don't think there was a physical mask that formed over the medium's face. I think it was a kind of hallucination, but it was a hallucination that was shared by multiple people. So that was pretty interesting.
That's incredible.
And then the other experience, and the other experience I had, which was really important for my research and where it went, was my hand possession experience, which I've talked about quite a lot, where my left hand seemed to be controlled by something that wasn't me. And it gave me this insight into the process of mediumship, where, because I've now experienced that, even to a certain extent, I can imagine it expanding out to the rest of my body. And, it gave me the realization that at the very least, even if there is no other kind of ontological truth to mediumship or the claims of mediums that they're interacting with spirits, at the very least, there is an experience that we can have that seems to suggest that our bodies can be controlled by something that isn't ourselves, even if it's not actually even if it's not actually happening, the experience nevertheless exists. So it was really a useful experience for me, and it's kind of grounded my research trajectory, that there is an experiential dimension to all of these things, and that the best way to appreciate it and to understand it without trying to break it down and reduce it into something that no one really understands is to participate in it and experience it personally.
Well, I was just going to say that what's the most important message of your work, but you've just answered it there, most definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, your website one more time is?
Yep, jack-hunter.webstarts.com.
Excellent. Okay. Well, like I say, your books, your website's been coming on throughout this interview, and obviously we've said your website there for the podcast, so that's fantastic. I just want to say, Jack, thank you for giving me the time that we've had right now, and I really appreciate the work that you've done and you will go on to do for this community as well. Thank you so much.
It's great. Thanks so much for inviting me. It was great.